Good morning and welcome to Sage 300 Transaction Flow Session. Today we'll be talking about and discussing the flow of information through journal entries through the various modules in Sage 300. First, let me introduce myself. I'm William Wingson, and I will be doing the session based on the modules within Sage 300. I'll first mention why the journal entries are important. We'll also talk about the transaction flow within Sage 300, and I will have a diagram to show you on that. I will talk about basic accounting, debits and credits, which most of you are already familiar with. So forgive me if I repeat this, but I think it's critical that some understanding of this is necessary. I will do journal entries. I do not know how much time I have, so I will do some. I will not be able to do all the entries in accounts payable and receivable that generate journal entries, but I will do some. I will also talk about the settings that are required for setting up the flow of information between the modules, as this is critical to basically understand the different modules and the information. So journal entries are critical and important because they're the foundation of your financial statement. It is through transactions and the creation of journal entries that accounts get updated. So it is often necessary to understand when I create a transaction, when I add an invoice, what journal entry is created. I also, if I did a prepayment, how will that show up in the general ledger? Which account is it going to? So a thorough understanding about the accounting portion, the journal entries, that foundation is critical to understanding your financial statement and getting reports in a timely manner and one that makes sense. And of course, this will generally help in your year-end. You will better be able to understand why things are happening the way they're happening in your accounting system. As you can see from this diagram, we have, if you want to call it, different layers. So the outermost layer is what we call the operation module, order entry, inventory control, purchase orders. And then we have the financial modules, which is the receivables, payables, and I included payroll there also. That and then the core, the general ledger in between the financials, the receivables and payables is something called bank. Now the bank is almost like a subledger module. And then I included at the end the general ledger. So if you notice, everything flows into the general ledger, right? Nothing flows out of the general ledger. So I wanted to point this out. It is going to be important to reiterate this, especially when people go to do bank reconciliation. And if you come from another system, for example, Sage 50, for example, you will not in Sage 300 enter let's say service charges in a general ledger and expect to see it when you go to do your bank reconciliation. So this concept of how the information flows is important. Okay? So as we can see, inventory control would send information directly to the general ledger, as with order entry and purchase orders. Right? Payroll will also do that. So all the modules, as it will, send information directly to the ledger. But purchase orders will also send information to payables, which will in turn send it to the GL. So when I do a receipt, right, that information goes from purchase orders directly to the general ledger. It will update the inventory control with the quantity also. But when I do the invoicing based on that receipt, when I enter the invoice, it will then go to payables, which when posted in payables will flow to the GL. Okay? And in some systems, some modules depend on each other. Okay? And some can work independently or with those modules. For example, inventory control can work on its own, right? But you can also have inventory control with purchase orders or with order entry. So the connection between these modules becomes important in understanding the flow of information. Let's go to the next screen. And this screen here, I have spent some time in just outlining the basic debits and credits. So if you had an asset and you increase the asset, you would debit it. So that means that you would enter it on the debit side. Okay, it's not a good thing or bad thing. It just means that if you increase the asset, you would do a debit. Likewise, if you decrease the asset, you would do a credit. Okay, as a point of trivia, I often ask accountants, why is debit DR and credit CR? So everybody says, well, it's the way you spell credit, C-R-E-D-I-T. Yes, but how do you spell debit, D-E-B-I-T? There is no R in it. So why is it called debit DR traditionally? Well, it has to do for historical reasons, but it used to be called debitor and creditor. Okay, so if you're curious, that's why. But the general idea is you should be familiar with, if I increase my liability, it's going to be a credit. Similarly, owner's equity. And revenue, increase in revenue is going to be a credit, while a decrease in revenue is going to be a debit. And expenses is the complete opposite. Increase in expense is going to be a debit, while a decrease in expense is going to be a credit. Okay, so now what I have here is the same bit of information, but just in a text format. So as you can see, there are 5 different types or grouping of accounts: asset, liability, equity, revenue, and expense. And this would show you an increase or decrease. So this is just a text format of the same what I put in the diagram previously. So let's get started. What I want to do first is I want to look at accounts payable. So we're going to look at the journal entries associated with some of the following transactions. As I said before, it's almost, it's fairly impossible to get through all the types of transactions in a matter of an hour. And then we have the other modules to deal with also. So what I want to do at this point, I want to exit my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and I'm just going to minimize the screen, and I'm going to go into my, let's see, my ACPAC or Sage 300. As you can tell how old I am because I still use the word ACPAC sometimes, but it's now Sage 300. And let us go into accounts payable. So the first thing I want to point out is under the setup here, there are things that control, or I have an extra folder in here which I will quickly get rid of. That was the folder that I added previously. So this is what you would see. So inside here, there is in each submodule, whether it's accounts payable or whether it's receivables, you will see something here called GL integration. When I open GL integration, okay, this area down here is particularly important. What I am saying is, how does this module connect with the general ledger? So I have selected the option to create GL transactions when I post something in accounts receivable, in accounts payable. So the option was during the posting process, or when I clicked on an icon called GL batch icon, create GL batch icon. Okay, so most people, for the sake of efficiency, will probably have it during posting. Okay, then you have some options here. How do you, once you have created a batch, what do you want to do? Do you want it to be placed in an existing batch? Do you want to create a new batch? or do you want to create a new batch and post it at the same time? So it's important to understand what's going to happen. Most people have create new batch. Now, it is noteworthy that if you did create a batch from AP, meaning that you created an invoice batch, you posted it, you go to the general ledger, you see that batch. If during your review of the general ledger, you notice something that is incorrect, it is not advisable that you change it in the GL. You should change it in the subledger in order to keep your subledger matching your control accounts in the GL. So generally, you should not make any changes in the GL for batches that come from the subledger. Okay? If the subledger is out of sync with the GL or the control accounts, it creates massive problems. Okay? So there's two ways of doing this. One is that when the batch comes over from the subledger, then you can automatically post it. Some people don't like that. Okay? Accountants generally like to have full control of the general ledger, meaning that they review it and post it themselves. The other option, which is less known, is that when you are setting up your control accounts, you can prevent people from entering journal entries to that account directly in the general ledger. So, for example, if I were to let me go into GL accounts, go to the account, wait till that opens, and let's say I select a bank account, for example. I'm going to click on my Finder and quickly find a bank account. So let's say this one here. So I select that, double click, and now it's open up. So it's already a control account. I'm just going to go to the subledger tab, and I'm going to delete this GL. Delete. So now all I would have is bank, and I save this. So what this means is that the bank, this bank account, the bank is going to be a subledger to this account. So if I try to create a journal entry for this account, it is going to give me an error message. So this account is 1022, so let me demonstrate that quickly. If I go to my GL transactions, I go to my batch listing. I'm going to open a new account, new batch. And typically we should put in a batch description, an entry description, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to put in the necessary information. So what I want to emphasize here is I want to show you that that account 1021, if I try to create a journal entry in the general ledger, it will stop me. So I enter 1021. When I hit the tab key, this is what I see. I get an error. 1021 is a control account and does not support the subledger GL. So typically we don't think of the GL as a subledger. So if you wanted to do a journal entry to this account, what you would have to do is you could do it. So you go back to your GL accounts. Maybe I have it open here at the bottom. I'm just going to check that out, GL account. And I'm going to add inside here, insert key. You can type it in GL, or you can click on the Finder and enter it. So I'm just going to type in GL and save it. Now, once that is saved, and I close out of the screen, if I go back to my batch and make a journal entry to this, if I select that account, 1021, if I hit tab now, I will not get that message I got before, because now, as it were, the GL is a subledger of itself. So if I hit tab, now I will be able to add an entry. But again, with this feature, with the ability to do this, comes responsibility. So you have to know that what you're doing, and generally we recommend you don't, information that's flowing from subledgers, you should not add journal entries directly in the GL to them, unless you know exactly what you're doing. Okay, so that is one of the areas when you're setting up the account where you can control what information flows in the GL or what you can do in the general ledger, not add journal entries to the control account. So now I am going to, let's go back to the AP transaction screen. We can see what we have set up under the GL integration, which is always here. There is one also for AP. We saw that, number one, we saw this where we can send information during posting. We can create new batches, right? And do not consolidate. Highly recommend you do not consolidate. Why? Because you'll be able to drill down. Okay? As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, many years ago, people would try to consolidate because they wanted to save on memory space. But these days, memory is pretty cheap, so you generally don't need to consolidate, and you will be able to use the drill down features. There's another tab up here that is not often understood or used, and that is how, when you send something over to the GL, what does it look like? What information goes into 4 fields? The 4 fields I'm talking about are the GL entry description field, the detail reference field, the detail description, and the detail option field. If I were to create an invoice, what I am doing is I'm going to send over the description from that entry. In the position, if I go to my detail reference, I am sending over the I'm in AR, sorry. I'm sending over my customer number and my customer name. Okay? So if I wanted to refer to AP, you would see the exact same thing applies. So if I go into AP setup, I have to move up a little bit higher here. Go into AP setup. Again, we'll see the same GL integration. If I go to my transaction, right? If it was an AP invoice, again, for the AP description, if I look at my reference, I see here my vendor number and my vendor name. So to see what am I talking about, these 4 fields, right? The 4 fields here, you want to see that in the general ledger. So if I go into my general ledger, GL transaction, I go to my batch list, and I'm going to look for an AP batch. So a quick way of looking for an AP batch, of course, is you can type in AP, and then tab, and then if I'm going to look at, well, all these batches are open, so I'm going to look for, well, it doesn't matter whether it's open or not. So let's click on one of these, highlight, open up one of them. So here we would see this is an AP invoice batch, right? Here under the reference, I would notice that I have my customer number and customer name. Under the description, I would have my invoice and probably the invoice number. And so this is field number 1, the entry description field. Then we have field number 2, the detail reference field. Field number 3, the detail description field. And if I tab all the way down or scroll all the way down to the end, the detail comment field. So these 4 fields that I'm referring to is controlled in the subledger module. If I go back in my subledger module here, right, it's controlled by this. So if I look at my comment field, for example, detailed comment, then I would see it's the batch type and the batch number that's going to go into the comment field. So this determines what goes over into the general ledger. So again, the people in the general ledger might not be aware that this exists in the subledger, and in each subledger you would see this. So I did one in the AR, and I also looked at the AP module. So looking at the AP module under transactions, if I were to do an invoice transaction, enter an invoice, so I'm going to create one, I'm going to hit new, or create a new batch. Okay, so I've just created a new batch. I can put in a batch description, which you should do. In the future, I will, in this exercise or in this session, I will not enter it again for the sake of time. And sometimes you put in the initial of the user. Okay, although you can tell who enters each transaction here. This is maybe the person creating the batch. I'm going to add a vendor number. You notice the asterisk. So we have a vendor 1400. And I can put, typically what we do is we enter a document number. So again, notice the asterisk next to it, which means it's compulsory. So normally we put in the document total first. Okay. And now we could either use the distribution code or we can type in the general account directly. So a distribution code, let's say, was office supplies. That account is probably 6,500. And here I can put in the amount of the purchase, the office supplies. I'm going to enter 100 tab. Okay. Now, what is going to happen? What happened is that taxes got calculated automatically. So if I go to the taxes tab, I will see here the tax amount is calculated, right? The GST and the PST. As you know, the GST in British Columbia is refundable, while the PST is not. Okay. So now, what we can do, we can add this. Typically, when we add it, it would go to the next entry. Okay, so if I click on the Add button, it goes to entry number 2. Okay, so if I wanted to post that one, all I would have to do is go back. Go back to the first entry, and now I can see the post button available. Again, this post button was added to the, by the way, it will post the whole batch, not just one entry. So this post feature, post button, was added in, I think, 2016 period update 2. Okay, some people said, you know, we like the feature the way it was before because I have data entry people and I don't want the data entry people posting the batch until the accountant reviews it or I review it or whatever it is. So in this case, you can hide that button, the GL post button. So you go to File, you go to Customize. Now you have to have a profile. So let's say select the profile. And what I'm going to show you, point out here, is that you see the post button is available. If, however, I uncheck this, notice it's gone. So if you wanted to control when, where to post from, okay, you want to force to post this thing of batches or anything like that, then you can use this feature to prevent people from seeing certain icons. Now, when I hit OK, it will come back simply because I'm logged in as the admin. The admin has rights to everything. Okay? So this what I just did applies to anything. If you have a policy, you never do prepayments, or you want to hide that prepayment button, or there's anything inside here that some people would have rights to, but you don't want other people to have rights to, you can get rid of all of those things there. So if some people would complain that the screen is too cluttered, you can unclutter it. Okay? Now, and this goes for any tabs also. So what I want to do now is I want to post this, right, to show you. So I click on the post button, right? As it said right to post, I'm going to say yes. So it's posting that batch. So now what I want to do is I want to print a report that shows me the journal entries. So one of the quickest ways is under the batch list. Scroll to your right until you see the posting sequence number. Okay. Then you would double click on it, and what you would see here is just click on it twice. Yep, there it is. Okay. Right. It will open up the AP posting journal entry report, but the advantage of doing it from this spot is that it would automatically default to the posting sequence. This particular posting sequence that you highlighted, which is 49, it will automatically select the type of journal, and it will select to sort by. So here you can hit the print button, and that will print and show you what the journal entry is going to be. So this is the best way to do it, simply because you don't have to find the particular report. I'll show you the alternative also. So here you would see that for this account, the accounts payable has increased, because this is an invoice, right? I'm owing this amount of money to the office supply expense account. It's $100, and then I would have the office supply notice it's $7. That is because it's GST. That's because it's PSD, and because PSD is non-refundable, it's going to be allocated to the office supplies. The GST is a separate account, right? This is a GST that I would have received from, this is the GST that I am going to be paying my vendor, okay? Okay, so now to print the same report, the other alternative, if you don't want to do it this way, obviously you would go into your transaction report. You would have to go to your posting journal, right? Then you would have to select the appropriate posting sequence. And in this case, it's going to be, let's say the last one is 40 tab. Okay, and then you click on print again. So this is, I should have clicked on, right. So now you notice, yeah, this is a different one. I should have clicked on previously printed journal entry. So let me just make sure that's the last. Again, I am in the different module altogether because I should have minimized this at the side here. Scroll up to the top, go to my transaction report up here to make sure I'm in AP. Again, the posting journal, as you can see, it's very similar, right? And I should have recognized the 49 instead. So I'm going to enter 49. Because I may have printed it before, I'm going to turn this option on and make sure it's invoice, vendor number, and now I'm going to hit print. So as you can see, by accident, I showed you it's very similar in the AP module as in the AR module. But this is the one that we had before, the accounts payable, etc. But for myself personally, I just prefer to go to the batch list click on the number. It's just a less clicking and getting the same report. The other thing you can do is just go directly into the GL transaction batch list. When you open up the batch list, we would see the, this is 312, is it? Yeah. Okay. So I would see the same thing here. If I scroll to the side, $100. So you can look at it in the GL also. This batch is open, the status is open. Okay. And if we wish, we can post this batch. So I'm just going to select all the existing batches here. Now, so that is if we were to do an invoice. And we can go through the different transactions we can do in the general ledger. In the AP transactions. I can do within an invoice batch. I could also do a credit note. I can do a debit note. Okay, all of these would generate journal entries. So if I were to do a credit note, just to show you that quickly, I click on the new button here. I add the vendor. And the vendor, again, 1400, I'm going to stick with that. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to enter the entry description and the batch description, but you should do this. I'm just doing it for the sake of efficiency to get things done very quickly. Let's say I don't know which document to apply it to. I don't know if it's going to, I just got a credit note because I complained or whatever the situation is. I am going to enter here, let's see, 224 tab. So you should enter it. Now notice that I did not put a negative sign. This is a credit note because the document type is a credit note. And I'm going to, I can type in the account. I don't have to enter the account. So that's 6,500, which is office supply account. And in the amount, I'm going to type in 200. Tab. Okay. So when I go, escape, move away from this line, I notice that my undistributed amount is 0 because taxes would have been calculated under $200. So this is a credit note. Again, I can see the taxes here. It's going to reduce the amount of GST I have to pay, right? So now if I were to post this, so first of all, I would have to add it. So I go to add. Oh, I forgot my document number, which is compulsory. As you can see, asterisk is next to it. I'm going to just call that credit note, let's say 999 tab, and now I can add it. So the system is smart enough, or tries to be smart enough to prevent you from making unwanted errors. I'm just going to go back to that entry number 1, seeing that I can post from here. Click on the post button. Yes. And now it's posted. Okay. So now, again, the same thing applies. I can go, if I were in the posting, I can scoot across here till I see posting sequence. I can click on it. It will automatically bring this up. Although it's a credit note, it does say the invoice batch list. Okay. And I would see the entry. Because I said during posting, I can see the, again, this is a credit note, so you would notice that my accounts payable is reduced. And what I want to, and I notice here that my GST that I have to pay is also reduced. Okay, so we can also look at this through the general ledger as we did before. So I can go into my GL batch, GL transaction, my batch list, open it up, and I would see here, this will be, if I click on this one, 313, batch 313, I will see here that this is the credit note, right? So it's the same thing here, okay? And we can do a number of different entries. So now I'm going to look at okay, so let's move on to another module. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close out to that. So there's a number of transactions that we can do in here. That we can look at the invoice batch list. We can do a payment type. We can do different types of payment, right? So maybe I should open a batch here. Let's go and see that. New. So in terms of time, I can't go through every module. So what I might do is we would have to break it up later on, I guess, to do one particular module. So right now, I'm just going to give you a flavor for some of the modules. So this is a payment. This is the payment batch. Typically, we would do a payment. Notice that this is the bank account here. Okay. I am going to, let's do a payment for, oh, I didn't put in a vendor number, and I know there's a vendor 1400. I'm going to process a payment for, let's say, this invoice here, this one here. So I paid the full $300, and I'm going to click on Add. Again, I'm going to go back one because I want to post this very quickly. Once I post this, a batch is going to show up in the general ledger. Why is that? Because I have set it to create a batch during posting. So I'm going to quickly print the check. This is AP. I'm printing to screen, so then we will see the check coming up. Once I close that, it's going to ask me whether the check's printed successfully, and I'm going to say yes to that. And then it's going to ask me, oh, by the way, sometimes people don't be too quick to click on yes. Make sure if you're printing 10, 15 checks, make sure you go to the printer and grab the checks. Make sure that them were printed correctly. Okay? What you don't want to do is you don't want to start the posting process, right? If something didn't get printed, for example, the check got chewed up, one check got chewed up or something like that in the printer, right? Then you would have to go and reverse the check and then redo them again. If you check on the checks before and you just say, wait, was it printed correctly? You just say no, and then you go back and you reprint them, okay? So don't be in too much of a rush. Make sure you test the checks. So I've posted this batch with just one entry in it. And what I'm going to do now is, so as you can imagine, I can again print the journal entry here. So my bank is going to be decreased and my payables is also going to be decreased. So if my bank is decreasing, then what I want to do is it's going to be a it's a credit to the bank account. So if I click on this last one here, it'll be a credit to the bank account. My payables is going to be reduced, so it's going to be a debit to the accounts payable account. I'm owing less money because I've paid that bill. And here we see that. So I can look at it through the transaction that flows in, or I can look at it in the print a report, the posting journal report, and I can see those entries. Now what I want to do is I want to go to, so the transaction types in the general ledger and in the accounts payable and the accounts receivable is pretty similar. Okay. What I want to do for the sake of touching on different types is look at the, let's say, the inventory control, the operation modules. Okay. So again, at a later date, I'll probably go through every single transaction, let's say in the AP module, or I would probably do every single transaction in the AR module. But right now, we are just going to look at the inventory module. So if I scroll down here to my inventory and transactions. Now, if you have inventory transactions, and let's say you don't have, let's say, purchase orders, then you might want to do the receipt inside here. So I'm going to set up, let's pretend that we don't have the PO module. So I'm receiving some items. Again, I'm receiving them from vendor 1400. Right? And let's pick an item number. So I'm going to pick the first item number. The fluorescent bulb. And I have to put in a location. So I'm just go, oops. I'm going to put in location number 1. So if I tab across, so just type it in. So use the mouse, just tab. And let's say the amount received, I'm going to say it's 10. Okay. And based on the cost, I could modify the unit cost if I want. I can change this to, let's say $50. It went up in price by quite a bit. Okay. And now what I can do is I can post this. So this is a receipt, inventory receipt. I click on post. So a couple of things that's going to happen. As soon as I click on the post button and the posting process is done, it's going to update the quantity on hand. So the quantity on hand is going to change immediately. However, the amount, there is nothing going to show up in the general ledger because what I did was under setup, like in all the modules have it, what I did was I said I want the GL entry to be created during the day-end processing. Then what I want to do is I have to run the day-end processing in order to update the GL, right? So if I go into my GL transactions, I will not see that batch at present. So if I were to scroll down here to my folder, GL transactions, right? I have added this batch, this GL batch. Typically, you don't have it inside here, but for the sake of completeness or to speed things up, I added in. So the way you add it is pretty simple. You go into GL transaction, you right-click on the batch, you copy it, and then I'm going to go back into this area of purchase order transaction, and I right-click and I paste. It's that simple. Of course, it's called GL. It's the batch list, but because it's a GL, what I should do is I can go inside here and rename it as GL batch, just so that there's no ambiguity that it's created GL batch list from what. So I'm just going to type in here GL. Okay. So all I want to do here is I wanted to show you that that there is no batch inside here. So I click on the GL batch, and there is no batch. Okay. So again, so I did the receipt although I did the receipt in the IC, right? And now I'm going to do the day-end processing. So I click on that, click on day-end processing. Again, I copied it other places. I could have done it from here. I process. Okay. And now if I go back to my general ledger, I should have added it here too. But if I go back inside here, go back into the batch list, I will see now there is an entry. Oops, here we go. To your batch list. And if I, it should come in. Maybe if I refresh this. Oh, I'm only looking at AP, so I got to delete this. Or I could type in IC if I wanted to, but let me hit refresh. And then scroll down to the end here. And I can see I had 10 at $50 each. So I see here my inventory has gone up by $500, and I have accounts payable clearing account because I don't know which vendor this is for, right? So that thing has hit the AP. So if you're using inventory control, you do a receipt, this is a transaction you're going to see. So the next step is, this will not create a transaction in accounts payable. So to do the transaction in accounts payable, you'd have to manually go and add it in. Now, if you had purchase order module, this would not be necessary to do the invoicing from purchase orders. But let us pretend that we don't have that module, purchase orders. So what you'd have to do is you would have to go to AP module, and you're going to have to do an invoice. So you would go into AP transactions, you're going to invoice batch list, right? And I'm going to create new batch. I'm going to select the vendor, 1400. I'm going to add, typically we should add the item inside here. So let's say it's, I forgot, it was $500. So if I were to add the amount inside here, but now we have taxes to deal with, so I'm going to enter the account for the AP clearing account, which is going to be 2040. I'm going to, the amount of it's going to enter is 500. Now, in addition to the 500, if I get out of that, there's going to be taxes to deal with. So what I'm going to enter here is going to be 560. Right? And I'm going to add this and then post it. So I'm going to add. Oh, I forgot the document total, of course. Oh, sorry, the document number. So this is the number of the invoice. And what I'm going to do is add it. Then I'm going to post it, so I can do it from this screen also. I just have to go back to the first entry. And now I can click on the post button. Yes. So what I'm going to see now is the accounts payable clearing account is going to be empty, but I have one other issue, and that is I have a PST tax in here. So now if I go back to my, I can do it from the report, or I could simply go to the GL transaction, go to the batch list, and I would see inside here, this is the batch that I was just created. And here is the entry. So now my account, clearing account, is going to be empty. So I'm going to get rid of $500, but $35 from the PSD got added to it. So what I can do, I did not cater for that at the first transaction. I wasn't aware of the PSD, so I can do a journal entry to move it from the clearing account into the inventory account. Okay, otherwise everything is fine in that I have my payables, how much money am I owing? I'm owing this amount of money, right? And this is where the expense account comes in. Notice there's no inventory account. So this is if you were doing inventory control without purchase orders. So how is this different if you had purchase orders? Well, if you have purchase order would send an entry once you do the invoicing to the AP module. So let me show you that. And this, because of the time constraint, this will be the last thing that I'll be showing you as a transaction. Okay. I guess at a later date, we will then break up these modules into smaller ones to show you all the transactions. But let's say, first of all, in the purchase order module, creating a requisition or creating a purchase order would not create a journal entry. A requisition is just people within the organization trying to inform the purchaser that they require this, these items to be purchased for the company. The purchase order is a promise to buy. So you're promising to buy from the vendor whatever items you have on the purchase order. You don't have to buy them, but if you don't end up buying them, you are legally, you are responsible for the stocking fee. So if the vendor had to incurred costs in getting these items ready for you, and you change your mind at the last minute, they can then bill you a restocking fee. Okay? A receipt entry. So I'm going to do a receipt entry. So now, instead of you doing a receipt through the purchase order, through the inventory control module, I'm doing it through the purchase order module. So typically you would have a purchase order, then you use that purchase order to create a receipt. Right now I am just going to, we can do a receipt directly. So I am going to enter the vendor number. Again, I am going to select or enter 1400. Okay. I am also going to put in the item number. I'm going to select the first item just because it's easy. So first item, which is the light bulb, fluorescent light bulb tab. I need a location. Okay, the location cannot be blank. So the location I'm going to enter inside here 1 tab, and the quantity that I'm receiving. So this is in, I'm going to receive, let's say 20. Okay, at $50 each. So again, I can change the price. So, oh, of course I said 20, but what did I enter? I entered 200. So I'm going to just correct that to 20. Okay. So now I am going to post this. Okay. So now when I post it, I will get, it's going to be receipt number 87. So I don't want to print it. Okay. So at present, if I go back to my journal entry in the general ledger, I will see here there's no new additional batch, right? It's still batch 317. And that is because I haven't run the day in. Because when I set up my system, I said I wanted to run the day in during the, every time I select an item, this is going to pop up. I should change it. Okay, so now I'm going to run the end, and as I mentioned before, I quickly added it inside here. It's not normally here. So I click on the day end processing, done. I am going now to look at my batch list. I would see now batch 318. Oh, where, yeah. So there is no IC batch. So if there is no batch from inventory control, it will create an empty batch and then automatically delete it. But if I go into this batch here, I will see that this is the inventory has gone up by clearing account, AP payables. Okay, and this is the taxes that were involved. Now, this is similar to what we had before. The difference now is I'm going to do an invoice batch or an invoice entry in the purchase order module. This information is going to go to the AP module, which will then, when I post it in the AP module, will then go to the general ledger. Okay, so I am going to select or create the number. This is the invoice number. I am going now to, I know the receipt number is the last one. So when this opens up, I think it was 87, but I'm going to find it. So I'm going to scroll down to the end. And it's for $50,000. This is the one. Okay, so I'm creating an invoice and I'm going to post this. Click on the post button. Okay, so now this invoice is going to go into the accounts payables batch. So if I go to my accounts payable, and if I scroll up here, of course I keep cycling because to just be gentle and release it now. And now I go to my AP transaction. I go into my invoice batch list. And I go to the last entry for the last invoice batch. If I don't want to see all the batches, I don't know if this is the one. Okay. Okay, I think I did the day end. Let me just go into the batch list here. I'm going to see fresh because I had it open. PO generated batch 319. And this is the one. Yep. And it will show up under the AP transaction invoice batch. What I'm going to do is let me go back to this. This open. I don't want to see all the posted batches because it's just too much. So I'm just going to see the open batches here. The PO generated batch. I don't know what the cost is, right? Okay. And then you would post the batches inside here. Now I have to, again, you can either post the batches through here or there is a setting. I go into purchase orders, PO setting, options here. Setting. Oh, I can click on the icon, I will post the AP batch. So that icon here, the way this is set up, is going to be under periodic processing and create batch. And if I click on process, if there's any batch to be posted, the batch will now become posted here. Okay. So invoice batch posting sequence 52. So what I can do is I can go and print the batch listing, or I can go back into my general ledger, batch listing, refresh. And now down here, this batch here, if I open that up, I will see that is the same batch. Okay, that I had. Okay. So that is the flow of information from the sub-ledger into the general ledger. So in purchase orders, it will send a batch over into the payables module for the invoicing, which then flows into the GL. Okay. If I go back to our diagram, let me just minimize the screen for a second. And if I go back to my diagram here, you would see that the purchase order, if I make this the full screen so you can see it. If I do that, you can see the purchase order would send information to accounts payable. The receipt information went directly to the GL, and from the payables, when you post it, it will go into the general ledger. Okay, so I don't have time to go through every single module, but this is the general flow of the information. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, because it's coming up to an hour, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor for any questions that you might have. Okay, so I have one question. Okay, when you, somebody's asking me when you copy the folder, the GL, the batch to another place, when you delete it, will it delete the original? And the answer is no, it doesn't really delete the original. So if I go back into, just to show you that, go back into, let me see, all tab here. Okay, so if I were to add the batch list somewhere else, okay, so it's in the GL transaction, and I had copied it over to my purchase order module, just to speed things up a little bit. If I delete it here, if I delete, it will not delete in the GL transaction, will always be there. All I did was I deleted the shortcut. So this is, you can add things, and like I said, you can tell these are the original because you cannot delete it. It's impossible, right? But the ones you made a copy of, those ones you can delete. So for example, I made a copy of the day and here shortcut. I can delete this. But in the original, where it's located under the IC, this one here, I cannot delete it. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Can you show us recurring entries in the general ledger? Yes, I can show you recurring entries in the general ledger. So since I'm here in the general ledger, let me go to set up recurring entries. I have created an entry like a depreciation entry. Okay. So when you create an entry, you would notice here that you would set up a frequency. So I have started on the last run date was July 1st, right? So if I try to run it before that date, it will not, nothing will happen. So here I have a journal entry Well, it's going to repeat. It's a depreciation account, so it's going to be, I'm going to increase the cumulative depreciation, and this expense account here is going to increase every time I run this depreciation. So to run it, it doesn't happen automatically. You will have to go into periodic processing. Now sometimes you notice that I can't tell the words, it's truncated. So you can either hover over it, or some of you who want to change the view, you just simply change the view to the list view. So then the words are not cut off. So I wanted to look at the recurring batch here. Now, as I said before, the only reason that it will not work is because of the date. So right now, if I use that date, I know that the last date was July 1st. So if I run this, if I process, there'll be no transaction. No journal entry was created. However, if I change the date to beyond June 1st, so let's go, if I did, let's say, July, let's say August. So August 4th, beyond this, if I process it now, it will work. Last time it was run on July 1st, so it will create one entry. Where is this entry going to show up? Obviously, it has to do with, it's a general journal entry, so I will go into my transactions. I will go to my batch list. Again, if you want to go back to your regular view, just simply do the large icon. Oops, view, large icon, and go into your batch list. And you would see it's already open. GL, where is it? GL batch list right here. Okay, and I'm going to refresh that. Okay, and here we see the recurring batch down here. Okay. Now again, as I mentioned, you can make any changes that you want. If it's not $100, you want to change it for this, you can change it, etc. You can delete entries, whatever. This is just a batch. Okay. So there's a question here. Can you show how to create a GL batch list icon on another screen, such as AP? Okay, well, I will do that again. So basically, if this applies to any icon, so if you go under GL transactions, and you right click, you copy, and then if you go to, let's say, AP module or wherever you want to put it, so under let's say AP transaction, and I want to put it here, I can click on paste, and it would add the batch list. I have one already added, so I can delete that one. Now again, you should rename this because it just says batch list. So you can rename it, go to properties, and you can, let's say, this is a GL batch. So I can type in the full word general ledger or just type in GL. And here you have the batch list. Again, this is just a shortcut. Okay. Just remember that you are adding this, you're customizing the screen. It might be difficult if you call tech support or somebody and say, oh, I just go into accounts payable transactions and I go to my GL batch list. And they will have no idea what you're talking about because this is something that you have customized. Just be aware of that. It's not something that you have, that other people would have. And again, how do you know that you customize this? If you right click and you see the delete option available, that means that you have added this shortcut. If you look at the standard ones that come with the program, that ability is no longer there. So now I notice that there is no more questions. So I'd like to thank you for coming. What I want to do is to remind you, however, that the recording of this session can be found on Karen Business or YouTube. Okay. And again, if you have any further suggestions, let's let me expand this so that you can have a better view of it. Oops. Next one. Yeah. So again, it will be under the current website, current business, or YouTube current business. Okay. And now, again, my name is William Wingson. So if you have any suggestions, if you want to add anything in of the different courses that we would offer, please send me an email. Thank you, and bye for now.